Hi, I'm Nicola and I'm just starting a cut flower garden. I would like you to join along in my journey to see the ups and downs. I'm sure there'll be plenty of mistakes this season, and hopefully we can learn together. Hopefully I can share some tips and tricks that you find useful, so please stay tuned. I'm here to tell you about my journey as a flower farmer. I've just started this year, so it's June now, and I started thinking about it in January and probably started doing something about it in February. So my cutting patch, which is what I like to call it at the moment because it's nothing really substantial, really started developing when the weather got a bit warmer. So let's say February through to now. So the aim for my cutting patch is to be as productive as possible, but I'm also experimenting this year, so I want to see what grows, what I like, what doesn't grow, and then expand on that. But at the moment I'm just dealing with that patch behind me, which is about 6 metres by 6 metres. Obviously less of that is growing area because there's a greenhouse in the middle and there's paths, so slightly less, but still substantial enough to see where we are. As a lazy gardener, I've decided to use the no-dig approach and see whether this works for me for producing flowers. Now, you may be asking, what is the no-dig approach? Well, it was something that's been around and growing for years. I initially heard about Ruth Stout, which is American, and she used a process of covering everything in straw and planting within it. Now, I have had this cutting area or let's call it veg area or whatever. I've had this area for probably 3 or 4 years now. It was taken from the arable field that I showed you earlier. It was rotivated and it was grown on with vegetables in the first year. And everything was fine first year. I had a lot of weeding of creeping thistle, but I had plants that grew. I then, because of the weeds, and then there was also nettle, so because of that, I personally think the rotivation made it worse because it broke everything down and there was just more things to grow. So more roots were broken down, and each new root, each bit of root created a new plant, and it was just constant, which is what made me reach out to Google, and I discovered Ruth Stout and her approach. It's in a farming area that I live, and the local farmer had some straw, which is what she used. He did laugh at me. It's what I was doing, and he just told me, oh, it'll just sprout. What on earth are you doing? It's just going to grow hay or barley. But I was insistent and used it. And yes, it did sprout. However, it did suppress the weeds. So it was really interesting. So wherever the hay was, there was no weeds. The only problem is when I planted something within it, it seemed to, the plant was devoured by slugs. So the hay itself, or the straw, was a perfect breeding ground for slugs, especially, and this could be a UK problem because we've got heavy rainfall, so everything is generally damp, and so the hay just seemed to keep the slugs there, so that really didn't work very well. But it was evident over a winter and into the next year that wherever the hay was, there was less weeds than where it wasn't. So I know there was something in it, but it just wasn't perfect because obviously I couldn't grow anything because of the slug problem. So the following years I let's say got disheartened, and so didn't really do anything. So everything really became very weed infested over the next couple of years. I'll put a picture up as to what my starting point was. And as you can see, it was pretty grim. So I needed to do something. So I reread Charles Dowding's book and looked at how his approach, and again started with a cardboard layer, put it on top of all of the weeds, and then put a thick layer of compost on top. I'll show you in another video how I do that, because I'm just about to start a new bed, so I'll cover that there. But so as of March, February time, I started doing that. Now, because I have a significant area to cover in compost, then I needed a lot of compost. And prior to that, we had a compost pile that we've been cultivating but not really managing very well. So grass clippings went into the compost. Some garden waste went into the compost. We try to avoid putting perennial weeds in there like nettles and bindweed, which we have, couch grass, which we have. Try to avoid it, so we have a green wheelie bin system here in the UK where we are, and we put the green waste in that, and that goes away to some community facility for it to be processed and turned back into compost, so that they're doing the cycle on a bigger scale, and hopefully in that process things reach a higher temperature and kill the weeds, and therefore it works. But on a more local level in the garden, then I assumed that I couldn't be putting those weeds into the compost. So really the main compost that I had, which had built up over several years, was grass clippings, of which, whilst it was developing, it stunk to high heaven, slimy mess. It evolved, it got better, and the compost that I used was pretty good in the end. I'm quite impressed by it, and I was able to cover, let me show you. So I have 4 beds effectively. So we've got bed 1, which is this one here, bed 2, and then another bed on the other side of that path and arch, can't really see, and then my dahlia bed and raspberries and things over here. So I have 4 fairly large beds that we're using. This first bed here has got the garden compost in it. That also was extended to that half there of the second bed. And I've got a feeling it also extended into here as well, but not by very much. So we've got things growing there. So once I had run out of my own garden compost, I bought in a bulk bag of community garden compost. I didn't know that that's what it was when I was buying it. I googled it, it was a local supplier. It had a British certification on it. Not that I knew what that meant, but it had it on it. And it said all of the right things to make out that would be a good compost for soil improvement, for growing, blah, blah, blah. So I bought the bag. Now, the bag, it did look very, it's dark compost. It was very dry, but didn't really think anything more of it. And I put it on this bed. So this is definitely a bed that is completely garden and community compost. We have some of this bed as community compost, I think. So as you can see over this area here, and this section here was a mixture of the community compost and multi-purpose compost that I bought from the local store, just the cheapest stuff, just because I was running out and needed to get a thick layer on this bed because I know this bed has lots of thistles growing in it. As can be seen, I need to weed. So there were several beds here that used this community compost. Now, as you can see from this bed here, not much is growing in it. And it's not for the lack of trying. I have planted multiple seeds in here multiple times and just nothing grows. I have, as you can see at the bottom there, some lettuce plants that I planted the other day. Previously, I had a real slug problem. I probably still have. And so anything like salad leaves just got eaten overnight. So these have been in a couple of days and have survived. And then there are some perennial plants that or potted plants that I've planted in there that had a good root system, just to see whether they would support themselves in this compost better. So yeah, this is the result of this compost. If we look closely at it, it's a darker compost to the other compost, the garden compost. It is very dry and it never seems to take up any water. And as you can see, not only do seeds not grow, but weeds don't grow. And there is something. I'm yet to determine whether this is a seed or whether it's a weed. I've got a feeling it's probably a weed. And we have couch grass coming through that I pluck out every now and again. But that's coming from underneath because that's what was there. So the cardboard's not fully blocking out all of the weeds. But that's fine. I can deal with that because it's just bits and pieces here and there. Unlike the garden compost, which is weed heavy, shall we say. I have weeded this, it needs another weed, but we have plants that look good and healthy, and as you can see, I think we have nettles and other bits and pieces. So there are weeds, but I have to say, considering this compost was covered with nettles and sticky buds and brambles and things like that, I expected this to be a lot worse, and actually it's manageable so far and things are growing. So it's either this compost is proof that the annual seeds that are flying in the air that land grows things, whereas the community compost doesn't. However, more likely it was the seeds within the compost itself, and I just wasn't managing the compost heap properly to get rid of those seeds. So moving forward, I'll do better with that. So as a result, this community compost here, it's not growing any weeds, which is a good thing, but it's not growing anything else. So as a flower farmer, it's not really helpful for me. It's not productive. So I would say if you are wanting growth fairly instant, so if you're following a no-dig approach and expecting to grow that same season, this community compost is just not viable for it. Maybe over the course of time, this will actually improve the soil. I will do a video in the future to see whether that has indeed happened. I'm not going to take it off, but it's certainly not something that I can use now and be productive, whereas the garden compost can be. So as far as I can see, it's not really useful for growing anything, and also the water retention, and again that could be the problem because the water just doesn't stick in it, therefore it can't nourish and grow the plants. So as far as my purposes are concerned, which is productivity, it's no good. I also have an additional problem which may not be obvious, but let me see if I can point it out. Probably not. Around the edges seem to be getting dug up by something. I've yet to find out what the something is. I have a cat. It could be the cat, but that tends to roll about in the middle rather than digging up the sides. It could be rabbits. I have seen a rabbit in the field, so it could be. Hence the green netting. I was trying to keep them out with the green netting. Because nothing's growing in here, I didn't bother netting here. This bed hasn't been too badly affected, but this bed over here, which is nearest the field to be fair, every time I plant something in this area, which is the community garden, community compost area, it does seem to get dig up. So as you can see, more holes, plants just disappear. These were full rows of plants and nothing is growing in it. The odd sparse one. So instead of sowing the seeds, these were seedlings that I put in, and they have been better at growing. But as you can say, 2 larkspur, that's it. The amount of seeds I've planted for larkspur, it's just frustrating. A few sparse sunflowers in the community compost area. Massive sunflowers there. Admittedly, these were planted earlier, but we've still got growth. I don't know whether you can see, it's been dug up there. So again, I don't know what's happening. The netting doesn't seem to be stopping whatever it is. That may or may not be a problem with the compost. I can't blame that until I know what they are, but something is not happening. Whereas the straight garden compost at the end, absolutely fine. So I would say if you want to mulch your garden to prevent slugs and snails, the community compost, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. It looks nice and it prevents growth of all of the stuff you don't want to grow. However, if you want a productive garden, then use something else other than that. Or if you need a productive garden straight away, use something else. Now that I know that buying soil off the internet that you don't know where it's coming from, I'm going to make a concerted effort of creating my own compost, being better managed to try and avoid the seed control, and seeing how much I can create to expand the growing area. I hope this was useful. Now I need to get serious with my compost.